All right, I have white in this position, and I'll open with the pawn king. He plays g6 very quickly, so I'll play d4, taking the center. He played g6 to put the bishop on the longest dark diagonal of the board. And now I'm going to play knight to f3. He plays the pawn to d6. I'll even put the pawn on c4 to have this trio of pawns. He plays knight f6, attacking my pawn, so I'll play knight c3 to defend, of course. He does kingside castling bishop e2. For those who know, we're in a King's Indian defense used by black. He plays knight d7. And here, we can simply do kingside castling. But I'm interested in a structural change called the knight attack, which involves playing e5. Take, the knight moves, sometimes to g4. And my pawn on e5 goes to e6. I know I'll lose my pawn on the capture, but I'll ruin his pawn structure by creating doubled pawns and weakening his king. So I'm sending the pawn to e5. And so he decided to retreat. It's perhaps the best choice he could have made. He's now threatening to take my pawn on e5. Actually, he's not threatening because on pawn takes, pawn takes. At no point can the knight take because of the queen. So I'll just do kingside castling. And this move to e6, I'll still consider it soon. On the capture, you see I want to play knight g5. But he can move his knight, for example, to f6, so the bishop defends. I'd need my rook to also be on the file to help my knight attack. So I'll play rook to e1. And if he does nothing against this push to e6, I'll play e6 myself. If he plays e6 himself, he'll weaken the f6 square, meaning his pawn can no longer control the square. But, well, the pieces control that square well. He plays the pawn to c5. So here his idea is that if I take on c5, he can now take on e5. Now I'm looking at bishop f4. If he takes d4, I can retake with the queen, and my pawn on e5 is still sufficiently protected. So we'll play bishop to f4, especially since it helps my development. I only have my queen left to play, then my rooks will be connected. And he, for now, is holding the position with his defensive network of pieces, but it's quite passive. He has a lot of pieces on the 8th rank and on the 7th rank. You see, there's a concentration of pieces. He takes d4. So I retake with the queen. I have the rooks connected, and I have more height in the position. However, I can't take on d6. There's this pin problem. But here he's offering a trade, so I'll trade and certainly go take on d6 afterwards to create a pawn weakness. But he can retake with the knight. I can retake with the bishop. He can retake with the pawn, and he'll have a weak pawn here. But he'll have the bishops, and this bishop could at any time take my knight and also destroy my pawn structure. I can also place a rook on the d file. He'll take on e5. I'll retake, and I'll already have my rooks connected, so I'll have a slight development advantage. I think I'm going to do that. The rook to d1. I'm keeping up the pressure on the pawn on d6. So now he's going to have to start taking. So here, how am I going to take back? With the bishop or the knight? I'd really like to take back with the knight, but he can chase my knight away with f6, my knight leaves, and then play e5, pushing back my bishop. So I'll take back with the bishop first. Trying to counter his own bishop, which is actually very well placed on the diagonal. There, I exchange, and then I'll have to play b3 to consolidate c4. There we go. And in this position, what's the difference? We have the same pieces on the board, but I have a majority on the queen side. I have 3 pawns against 2 on the queen side, and he has an extra pawn on the other wing. But generally, when entering an endgame, it's better to have a queenside majority. And here I'm looking at moves like knight b5. It pesters the a7 pawn. The rook can't move as it would like. And I'm threatening knight c7 to take his rook and his bishop. So he'll probably move his rook, but taking his bishop degrades his pawn structure. So I'm going to play this move, knight b5, with the threat of knight c7. To attack his bishop, I also have moves like knight g5, which has the benefit of freeing up the f3 square to have the bishop on the diagonal. Besides, he's playing well. He plays rook c8. So I'm now going to play knight g5. He can play bishop d7 because the knight on b6 defends the bishop, and that's exactly what he does. And now he's threatening my knight. So I'll come to c3. I'm even looking at knight d4. Knight takes, rook takes. That will allow for doubling the rooks quickly. That's what I'm going to do, actually. Knight d4. Here we have an opponent who held his own in the opening, didn't make any big mistakes, and hasn't conceded much. So he exchanges, rook takes, there's still the threat on his bishop, the knight protects, he plays a 6. Should we double the tours? He'll have time to play bishop c6. Maybe play bishop f3 myself first. With moves like knight e4, knight f6 as well, but he plays bishop c6. So here I can try to damage his pawn structure a bit, but the knight is well placed. It'll prevent me from entering d7. I'm also looking at knight e4. If he takes, bishop takes back, he still has a problem on b7. Well, I'm just going to double the tours. If he takes on f3, the knight can take back. I have control of the d file. However, I don't have a penetration square. I can enter on d6, but that doesn't get me anything. And here he plays h6. So now I'm coming to e4. And I'm not afraid of bishop takes. Bishop takes because the game will be played on both wings. A very open game where the bishop will be better than the knight thanks to its long range. And the knight will be more restricted in his movements. And that's why he doesn't exchange. But here he gives me the chance to take the bishop and the knight for the 2 rooks. And that interests me. So, okay, I take on d7 and I take back. The pawn on b7 is under attack. He can try to play rook to d8 as well, but he won't have a mate threat on d1. The bishop controls the square. So he plays b6, but then knight to f6 check, bishop takes, and it's a catastrophe for him. And there we go. He resigns immediately. He played the opening quite well, but he cracked under the complications of the middle game. There it is. My opponent plays the pawn to d4, and I'm going to play knight to f6. I control the square on e4. He plays bishop to f4. The pawn to d5. Maybe he'll play e3 like in a London system. And that's exactly what's happening. I'm going to play c5 immediately. I want to exchange the wing pawn for the center pawn. But he plays c3. And here, if I exchange the wing pawn for the center pawn, he'll just take back with his own wing pawn. It's not very interesting, especially since it gives him the c3 square for his knight. So I'm looking at knight to c6 instead. Now, of course, after knight to c6, he can still take the pawn on c5. And it's not easy to get it back, because if I advance the e-pawn, even to e5, I attack his bishop, I attack the pawn, but his bishop can come to g5 to pin my knight, maybe eliminate it, which weakens the d5 pawn. So now I'm thinking it's not easy at all for me to get the pawn back after all. So I'm going to go ahead and take. I could have played e6 as well, so the bishop defends, but that would block my own bishop on c8. So for him, the best, I think, is to take back with the c3 pawn, but he takes back with the d3 pawn, which is understandable too. You know, it's possible. But here I play knight to c6. He plays bishop to d3, and I'm going to play bishop to g4. I'm attacking his queen with my knight there for support. Some players play queen to b3 to counterattack on b7, knowing I can't play rook to b8 to defend because of the bishop, right? But he plays knight to f3. So now do I play pawn to e6 or not? Careful. Pawn to e6, queen to b3. How am I going to solve the problem of the attack on b7? If I play b6, I weaken my knight. My bishop won't be able to come back. He'll play bishop to b5 for the pin, then knight to e5 to attack the pinned knight. There will be big problems. Look, in this position, I'm going to take his knight on f3 first. That way I draw his queen away, and then I'll play e6. And so in this position, I've given up the white square bishop. I've given the bishop pair to my opponent. So he has the bishop pair and this white square bishop, but I'm going to play to try and neutralize this white square bishop, meaning not giving it any play, no diagonals, and instead fight on the dark squares. In fact, one of my next moves will be bishop to d6 to offer an exchange of dark squared bishops and thus try to break his bishop pair. He won't have both bishops anymore. See, I play bishop to d6. He can play bishop to g5 to refuse letting me break his bishop pair. But I can also go back to e7 and at some point move the knight, still hoping for that exchange. He goes to g3. So now I can take. He can take back with the h-pawn to open the h-file against the h7 pawn, which is well defended, right? It's not that serious for me. He can also take back with the queen to attack g7, but that's not a problem. I can do kingside castling or even g6, to consolidate on the light squares so his light squared bishop can't play. And so I'm going to exchange, by the way. I'm not afraid. I'm not even afraid of the h-file opening. I'll be careful, of course. I certainly have that factor in mind. He takes back with the f pawn, so that's more surprising, but maybe he wants some play on the f-file, right? It's understandable. All right, I castle. And now we'll see. Does he do kingside castling or does he lead the position toward opposite side castling? But as you saw, he did kingside castling. So as I told you, I need to engage the fight on the dark squares. How to engage the fight on the dark squares? I have this push to e5. Why engage the fight on dark squares? Well, mainly because I have an extra piece to fight on the dark squares. His bishop can't. And so on pawn takes, knight takes, I attack his queen and his bishop. I also free up this dark diagonal for my queen. So this push to e5 is quite good, especially since he's almost forced to take. Otherwise, e4 really hurts. Otherwise, I could also go and destroy this pawn structure with rook b8, b5, b4 to try and weaken this defensive pawn structure that protects the dark squares on the queen side. But here I think I'll be more direct. I'm playing e5. He can't tolerate e4, he'll take. Knight takes back, and then I'll see what I'm going to do. It's not certain I'll take his light squared bishop, because for now his light squared bishop doesn't scare me that much. So yes, I have an isolated pawn on d5. My pawn structure is more fragmented because I have a group of pawns here, a group of pawns there, and the isolated pawn. He has two groups of pawns. But the main imbalance in this position is the color play. I must play on the dark squares and he on the light ones. And look here, he places the bishop and queen to attack h7, but the knight holds that square. To get to me, he'd need to be able to make an exchange sacrifice for the knight, which he can't do for now. But now he's attacking my knight on e5, so I have to defend it. And maybe his intention is to play queen h3 to then do rook takes knight, then queen takes h7 mate. Of course, in the meantime, I would have played some moves. For example, here I'm looking at queen b6 check, king h1, knight g4. The knight can sometimes get into f2, but he has this double control of the f2 square. Otherwise, I have queen b6 check, king h1. I can take his light squared bishop first. I can also go and take the b2 pawn to attack his knight. For example, queen b6 check, king h1, queen takes b2. If he takes my knight on e5, I take his knight there and attack his bishop. I don't know which is better, but I'll play queen b6 check anyway. We're going to force his king to go to h1. It's true that after knight g4, I'd threaten a move like knight e3, the rook-queen fork. But always be very careful of those moves like queen h3. Because even if I take his rook, he takes back and he'll be ready to sacrifice the rook for the knight to try and mate me on h7 later. So there it is, he just moved. Now I can take his white square bishop, that's true. So am I going to do that? It'll rebalance the color game, but I can win the b2 pawn. He'll probably play rook b1 to counterattack the b7 pawn. Oh yeah, that's a shame for me. And so knight g4, what's he going to do? If he plays h3, knight e3, that's the good news. Knight g4. He can't move the queen to the h-file because of my own knight, you see? So it'll bother him, this move, knight g4. All right, I'm going to play knight g4. So now the threat is to play knight to e3, but I still have the captures on b2. So he played the b4 pawn, by the way. He was more afraid of the capture on b2, but maybe he just didn't see knight e3 coming, But I'll calculate it anyway. Knight e3, he'll play h3, knight takes, rook takes. And then he'll get ready to take my knight, but I'll have time to play g6. That way, his bishop doesn't attack on the light squares and his rook can't take my knight because my queen defends. So I can play knight to e3. So he goes to h3 as expected. You see, I take his rook, he takes back, and now he'll want to do rook takes knight. And so it's now that I play g6. The queen protects the knight. He can't take, and his light-squared bishop is muzzled by this structure of pawns. You see, I have a lot of pawns on light squares hindering it. But now he moves the rook to play rook h4, but he's going to have back rank mate problems. Well, I don't have much time in the position, though. I have to play very fast. I'm going to play queen e3. I'm attacking a lot of pieces. His king is vulnerable on the first rank, after all. That's interesting. And even if he moves to h4, I have the knight controlling that square on h7. So there's not much time, but there's a 3-second increment anyway. But the position is interesting. Now I'll have to finish him off. Now he can't defend everything with this queen breaking into his camp. He takes on f6. So yes, I wasn't protecting f6, but these two pieces are attacked, so I'll take his knight. Why? Because the light-squared bishop doesn't scare me. This structure of pawns is solid on the light squares. And now I'm threatening his light-squared bishop, I'm threatening his c3 pawn, and he still has defense problems on the first rank. So now I take c3 because I'm attacking his rook. At the same time, it wins another pawn, so the endgames are getting easier and easier for me to win. He plays rook f4. So now we're going to play rook to e8. We're going to bring the rooks into the fight. I need it. If I play rook h4, I have my queen's defensive returns. Anyway, he plays queen there because he wants to play rook here and take, but I'll always have the queen's defensive return. But here, obviously, what I'm going to do is rook e1. That way, if I play rook h4, he gets mated. The mate on the first rank. So he might play h3 to give an escape square. Now he plays king there, but I can give check. All right, I'll give check. He can't bring the rook back because he loses the queen. And if he moves his king, well, I could take his bishop, by the way, with check. And when the rook takes, I could take his queen. So now he's going to lose material. So there, he moves his rook there, I take. And now he's going to resign now that he's down a queen. So it's cruel for him because he bet everything on an attack on the h-file, and finally he's the one who loses his queen on the h-file. But it must be admitted that I had long anticipated his attack on h7 and the blocking of the pawns on light squares. My opponent plays the pawn a4, and here I'm going to play the Sicilian defense. No, I'm going to play e5. Symmetry, because after all, you're often led to play e4, e5. He attacks the pawn. There's no better way to defend the pawn than to defend it with knight c6. Or else we play knight f6 to counterattack on the pawn e4. He plays d4. I take. It's what's called the Scotch game. He takes back with the knight. And here, it's not very interesting to take back, because taking back centralizes his queen, and his queen is well placed. So in the position, what we often play with black is either knight f6 to attack the pawn e4, or bishop c5. And if he takes on c6, we can take back, of course, but we can also insert the move, queen f6, because the queen and the bishop will threaten mate on f2. And so I could take his knight very easily once he has blocked the mate. So I'm going to play bishop c5. I attack his knight twice. He takes on c6, by the way. And you see, I'm going to insert queen f6. That means I could take back with the d-pawn later without fearing the exchange of queens. So it's good to insert queen f6 and threaten mate on f2. So how is he going to defend this mate on f2? I saw that in a World Blitz Championship. Now, Blitz games are fast games anyway, but I saw that there was a Grandmaster with white who had lost on the 6th or 7th move with white on this threat of mate on f2. I think it was a roughly similar position where at some point the knight was going to move and you get mated on f2. A Grandmaster at the World Championship. Just goes to show errors can happen from anywhere. But here you see, he just put the knight back, but it doesn't work. Bishop takes knight, quite simply. So I win the piece and I still have the mate on f2. But after all, I've only won back the piece I had given. I had given the knight on c6. I take it back on d4. So he plays on f3, but I'm better developed. Now I have bishop takes b2, which is interesting. So queen h4 check, there will be g3. So there's bishop takes b2, which is interesting, of course. And there's also queen b6, which is interesting with this threat of bishop f2 to dislodge his king. But bishop takes b2 is normal. Bishop takes, queen takes. He doesn't lose the rook. He can play knight d2 so that the queen protects the rook. And in the end, I've only won a pawn. Maybe it's not that interesting. Maybe there's better in the position after all. By the way, I'm interested in queen b6. Why queen b6? Because since I'm threatening to enter on f2, maybe he'll play queen e2. And then bishop takes b2 will be more interesting because after bishop takes, queen takes, I attack his rook. And if his knight moves, since his queen isn't on d1, it won't protect the rook anymore. So I'm going to play queen b6. Well, queen b6, he can also play c3 because bishop f2 check, he comes to e2. He shouldn't come to d2, right? Because otherwise my queen might be able to enter on e3. But on queen b6, c3, bishop f2 check, he can come to e2, and I can't enter because of his bishop. But still, I'm castling his king. I'm still going to play this variation with queen b6. In my opinion, he'll want to play queen e2 to control the f2 square. And even if he plays c3, bishop f2, king e2, okay, I don't enter, but it's not normal to play with a king on e2. He'll have problems completing his development. So it's his rook to think now. I've thought a lot finally in this position because for now I haven't won anything, right? It's just that I'm better developed than he is. I have 2 pieces in play. He has none. So that's good news when you have black. And there he plays bishop d3. So I still have bishop f2 check. He can come to f1 or he can come to e2. He's displaced, but I have no follow-up in the attack. Otherwise, I still have bishop takes b2, bishop takes, queen takes, but move the knight. And it's a bit of a shame to take his b2 pawn now because I let him play bishop d3 with a gain of tempo finally. But if I develop, for example, my knight, or I advance my pawn anyway, he's going to play c3 now. But maybe d6 isn't bad because if he plays c3, bishop f2 check. For example, king f1. And there I can maybe pull back my bishop to threaten the arrival of my queen. And if he plays g3, the other bishop comes to h3. And we're not far from mate after all. Listen, I'm going to play d6. I'm not going to take his b2 pawn for now. He can play c3, and I won't be able to take his b2 pawn, but I'll still try to play around his king. So he comes here to f1. And you see, it's what I was saying about bishop h4. If he plays g3, bishop h3 check. He'll be able to come to e2, and then my bishop will have to move because it's attacked, right? But, well, it doesn't matter. Let's try there. So I'm threatening queen f2, mate. Well, he can also play moves like queen e2 to defend, right? He plays g3, so that's what I expected. Bishop h3 check. He has to return to the e-file, and it's not that bad yet for him, right? He can return to the e-file. Now, my bishop is attacked, and we're going to put it on f6. He doesn't really have a choice anyway. And now what am I threatening? Maybe bishop to g2. Maybe I should have played that move and left my bishop on h4, bishop g2. Because it has no square, if it goes to g1, queen takes. I actually regret not playing bishop g2. I had provoked the move g3. I can infiltrate now with my bishop on g2. I'm disappointed. I missed the move there. But I missed the move due to lack of time too. I could feel the time pressure coming on. He plays queen e2 now, preventing bishop g2. Well played. All right, I'm going to do queenside castling. He plays bishop e3. I can't take on b2. The queen defends. That's a real shame for me. I'm going to play queen a5. Careful. He might look for g4 to trap my bishop, but I still have h5 to try and free it. I'll look to open up the position with d5. Let's not forget his king is uncastled. Even if it's back on its starting square, he doesn't have the right to do castling anymore. So look to play d5 right away, or knight e7, then d5. He plays g4. I'm playing h5. He wants to try and trap my bishop, but I want to open the position on the h file. He goes there. I take g4. He retakes. He wants to play rook g3, trap my bishop, but my rook defends. All right, I'll try to play d5 to open the position in the center. I really played this opening just like a total amateur, honestly. I definitely did not play well at all. I should have just taken on b2 in the opening. I tried to be clever, but pride comes before a fall. I have to be very careful because I haven't gained anything at all, and my bishop is still at risk of being trapped. But obviously his king is in the center. That's the problem for him. He's going to have trouble finding a safe haven in this position. If his knight goes to a3, I can do bishop takes check, pawn takes check, or queen takes knight. That's why he's going to d2. He goes to d2, and I'll play knight e7. He still can't do queenside castling. First, there's the pawn on a2, and don't forget, he's no longer allowed to do queenside castling. He moved his king. So now I've connected my rooks. Maybe I'll have to move my king to b8 at some point to avoid a check on this diagonal that could surprise me. He plays a3, he'll look to play the b4 pawn, but that will weaken the c3 pawn. But if he plays pawn b4, I have to be careful my queen doesn't get trapped either. On the capture, he wants to retake with the knight here. I'll play knight g6, maybe put a rook on the file, or maybe move up with my knight to e5 to attack his light-squared bishop and attack the g4 pawn twice. He's protecting it twice, but it could still be interesting. I have the d4 push, which could be interesting too. Bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes. Now he pushes the pawn, so I don't have much choice. Bishop here. Now I take, if he takes my queen and my knight can take back, he'll take back with the bishop, I think. He takes back with the bishop. I'm not leaving my bishop there. I'll go back to e6. He can do bishop takes, pawn takes, but knight takes, queen takes. Knight takes or queen takes. Knight takes. I don't have much time. If his bishop is gone, I have checks. Checks on d3. He comes here, bishop here. I attack his queen. Knight d3 maybe afterwards. His queen must defend h2. Otherwise, my rook can take as well. And now I have rook takes. If he takes back, knight f3 for the fork. And yes, he gets the fork. It was a deflection sacrifice to deflect his queen. An attraction sacrifice, rather, to lure his queen to a bad square. He comes to attack. I don't have much time. I go there, I attack b2. I didn't see a square for my knight. I attack his bishop, I attack his rook. His bishop is pinned. He comes there, his bishop is pinned. I attack again. He'll move his king so the rook defends laterally. That's what he does, but the pawn on a3 will fall. The pawn on a3 falls. He offers the exchange, I accept. I'm going to recentralize my queen to find some checks. Play a move like b6 to give some escape squares on white square to my king. Yeah, b6. Oh, I could have taken the bishop, but well, I'd kind of programmed this move in my head. He comes with a check. The bishop is still hanging, but I also threaten queen check to attack the king and the rook. But the rook will be able to come back. But now the king is so exposed in his own camp that he can't avoid all the forks. Now, I can even do queen check and take his rook because the pawn will win on its own and he resigns. A breathtaking game nonetheless.